I used to be a hard-nosed Darwinian reductionist, although I didn't actually know it at the time, but I absolutely was, and I got to say, it's really hard. You can be one even if you never went to college.
Hmm.
You can be a hard-edged Darwinian reductionist if you think that our ideas are in the mind, they're in the brain.
Hmm.
Because where else would they be? Because that's reductionism, that's physicalist reductionism. And my experience over decades has been it's really hard for some people, depending on how you were raised and how you were trained and where you grew up. It's once that reductionism has got you, and it can be really hard to take things like the reality of Eros as a divine being, to take that really seriously.
Tom Cheetham, it's great to finally have you on the podcast. We've been trying to do this for, I think, a few years, so it's happening.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I think I found you because, like, a long time ago, you did a bunch of podcasts where you're reading through James Hillman's work
Yes, yeah, I
and
did.
commenting on it, doing this exegesis of Hillman. And I was really getting into Hillman at the time, and I was like, "Oh, another Hillman guy!" And so it was really cool to like hear you, someone who's been engaged with his work for a long time and knew him, kind of unpack your takes on his work. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're a writer. You're like a Hillman scholar, Henri Corban scholar, and you do some teaching as well, right? Kind of rogue teaching.
Yeah, yeah. I taught I taught officially in academic institutions for about 20 years, but for the most part, I was teaching biology. Although I got Hillman in there because we at the little college in Pennsylvania that I taught for the longest, um, we set up an environmental studies program back in the mid 80s, I guess, or maybe it was late 80s. It was a long time ago. So it was one of the first environmental, I mean, it certainly wasn't the first by decades, but it was in the contemporary effulgence of environmental studies programs. We were fairly early. And it had to be, from my point of view, it had to be humanities and sciences. And I already had gotten on the Hillman train. So in that context, I taught Hillman, and I even got a
Hmm.
little Henri Corbin in there. So yeah, and
Well, it's
then
like,
after. Yeah, but just to do a quick,
uh-huh.
after I quit my full time job and we moved up to Maine, I have under the auspices sometimes of academic programs, and then most recently in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been teaching Hillman and other things just online, just
Hmm.
under my own name.
Small groups,
Yeah,
like study groups. Yeah, cool.
yeah.
Well, Hillman, I mean, he would be great to bring into more environmental studies programs. Like, I love his idea that if you're not open to the beauty of the world, you're not going to fall in love with it. And you need to kind of be in love with the world to want to really well, not save it, but care for it, let's say.
Yeah, 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 that's right.
It's a big idea.
It's a huge idea. So how do you want to go with this? Do you just want to?
Well, tell me, like, what was your introduction to Hillman? How did you discover his work? Where were you at? How did it affect you?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I can date it and I can place it. It was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the summer of 1990, and for various reasons, I was at the Santa Fe Institute Complex Systems Summer School, which was the first such summer school, and I guess they've been continuing since then. And I was there as a kind of an outlier. I was not an expert in complex systems, but Stuart Kaufman, who took a liking to me, and I was interested in that because in my capacities as a biologist, I had gotten interested in complex systems theory. So I was in Santa Fe as a full-blown scientist, and I was in a bookstore in the central square there, and I just saw this book called A Blue Fire, and I picked it up and I read the back, and I didn't know any of these people. And I thought, this is a pretty cool title, and it sounds pretty interesting, and so I bought it. And when I got back home to Pennsylvania, at some point I started reading it, and kapow! uh, my undergraduate training was in philosophy, and that didn't work out over a number of years. And I ended up in the sciences, and I ended up teaching in the sciences. But I always had both of those components. And it was like a thunderbolt reading Tom Moore and then Hillman. And I thought, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for all my life. And it was this, still to me, vague notion of imagination, which just puts everything in context. This is not a deep philosophical statement, although I could pretend that it is. But it allowed me, Hillman's perspective, to say yes to the sciences and yes to the humanities. And although I'm quite confident that I didn't see this clearly for quite a while, the reason, one of the many things about the natural sciences that attracted me so is that it just changes your vision of everything. And you just throw your imagination wholeheartedly into plants or genetics or insects or, and it just, when you do that, when you fully engage your imagination, the whole world comes to life. And then, but that's not supposed to happen, because when you go to grad school, you are told, no, 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 we deal in facts and proof. And so, anything that's interesting in your dissertation has to be removed.
Problematic.
Yeah. And so, but I had both of these things actively in me. And of course, one of the great things is that there are people in the humanities who understand the sciences from that point of view as imaginative disciplines. And there are people in the sciences who also overlap into the humanities, but those are pretty small numbers, In any case, Hillman's point of view, there's another component to this. On the one hand, there's that, which is suggested to me, however, unconsciously, that it was all of a piece as long as you stood in the imagination. And the other thing that was going on is I was having my Jungian midlife crisis, because I was 38 when I started reading Hillman. And, we don't have to go in those details, though I've told the stories a number of times, but I was starting to lose it. and after reading Hillman, I thought, I need a Jungian analyst. That's the only kind of person who's going to understand what's going on. So I got myself a Jungian analyst, and the rest of the story, just to do it really quickly, is after I'd been reading Hillman with extreme enthusiasm for at least 2 years, I happened on the essay, The Thought of the Heart. And that's the one that he begins with Henri Corbin. And my hero, James Hillman, said, if you really want to know about imagination, you read this guy. And this, of course, is pre-internet. So, okay, fine. He's a scholar of Islamic mysticism. Fine. So I bought his book on Ibn Arabi, and it eventually showed up in the mail. And I started reading it, and I thought, oh, shit. This is all the Bible and the Quran and angels? What the fuck? What's going on here? I can't read this. But my hero said, this is the man. So I kept struggling with it, and flash forward like 35 years, and it was transformative. So Hillman and Corban and Jung. I mean, I knew a little bit of Jung from undergraduate days, because everybody did in the 70s. but when I started reading Hillman, I realized I need to know more Jung. So I read Jung and Hillman and Corban in a kind of triad for years, and that turned out to me to be therapeutically useful and intellectually useful, if there's a distinction.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, like Hillman would say that he was involved in a therapy of ideas. And
yeah,
I see that as kind of doing therapy on the inherited ideas we have about, therapy or life or whatever it is. But I also spin it because I think some of his ideas are therapeutic. If you
yeah,
can take them in, they'll
yeah.
work on you and help to free some of those constrictions around ideologies and things.
Well, I mean, it's clearer and clearer to me now after what is it? This is 2025. After 35 years of some familiarity with Hillman, it ebbs and flows. That the other thing that he gave me um, was his fluidity and his polytheism, and exactly the sensibility that you just articulated. I've told this story dozens of times, but it's still really good and it's quite short. My favorite moment from teaching Hillman happened in the 90s at that little school in Pennsylvania. And we were reading Revisioning Psychology, just me. It was a women's college, and there were me and maybe five or six of these young women. And at one point, one of them, just slammed her hands down on the table and said, "Oh my God, you mean you can think that?" And that's it. That's what I got from Hillman. Holy you can think this? Who would have
Yeah.
guessed that this is an idea that you're allowed to have? And I think I've been unpacking that for the last 35 years, and I'm still surprised to find things that are anchors or walls that I don't know I'm trapped in or trapped
Mm-hmm.
by. It keeps happening, and you think, oh, another one. you know.
Yeah, another construct. I mean, Hillman, it's amazing because I've been sharing his work. I see it's kind of like, I'm a Gen Xer coming up, discovering Hillman and been studying him for a bunch of years and sharing some of his work, just try to get it out there to,
Yeah.
me being like a bridge to the younger generations, right? And a lot of times when I put stuff out, it really, really triggers people. Some of his ideas that challenge, norms around childhood trauma and therapy and things like that really triggers people. And I think that's what you're talking about when it rubs up against some kind of ossified structure in your mind, and he comes along and like tap dances all around it.
Yeah, yeah. That's that's what I love about him. And the other thing that I have said many times, which is absolutely true, that when I was going through for many years a lot of psychological distress, when I was feeling threatened, I'd read Jung. And when I was feeling trapped, I would read Hillman, and I thought, and both of them were necessary.
Yeah,
It's just sometimes you need Jung, and sometimes you need Hillman.
yeah, I got the same kind of relationship with Thomas More and Hillman. Thomas More I
Okay,
go to for like comfort and like reassurance, and
yeah,
Hillman I go
yeah,
when I need like to shake things up again.
to be blown apart. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
still, it's the greatest. Any idea you have, if you give it to James Hillman, he will diversify it and fragment it. And there's another component to this, which was really important to me at the time. Let's see, this was in the 90s. Uh, I don't admit this often, but most of my people know it. My dissertation was in systematic entomology at Iowa State University. And the reason that happened was because in the midst of my study of physics, I fell in love with insects, and we needn't go into the details, but I was struck in a very Hillmanian way that Oh my God, that breath intake that you've never seen anything so beautiful in your life. First time, as an adult that I looked through a magnifying glass, I just fell in love with insects. And then I had a series of extraordinarily good teachers. When we got to Iowa State, the only person who was studying insect diversity was the guy who did fleas. So I wrote my dissertation on the genitalia of fleas, about which we could talk a lot. Um,
Talk about
but the
micro penis.
yeah, no, exactly. But without going into fascinating details, what I'll say is the one of the great attractions to biology as a whole for me, and to this day, is diversity, the extra and the details. I was a professional. I stared down the tubes of microscopes professionally for 40 years as a teacher, and then after I quit academia in my day job. And the extraordinary beauty and detail and diversification of the natural world is something I breathed for decades. And hitting that, and there's something that was what drew me into complex systems theory. The fact that in the realm of mathematics, you can have what looks to be and is an extraordinarily simple little mathematical formula that you could learn as a sixth grader. And when you give it the right kind of poke, it explodes into infinite and inexplicable wonder. So it was
Right.
that sensibility that I had as a natural scientist. And when you first hit Hillman, that's what he does. He takes
Yeah.
something that seems simple, pokes it a little bit, and you think, oh my God, this
Yeah.
is incredible.
And next thing you know, you're studying Jung, Neoplatonism, alchemy, Goethe, the
Yeah, yeah,
Romantics, and all that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
There,
yeah,
it's like
exactly.
yeah, every one of his ideas is like a kind of a zip file that
Oh, that's good.
you can
Yes.
keep like unpacking, 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 and it'll lead you all down these different roads. And I think like for me as a kind of a lay, semi-professional depth psychologist, that's been my education is
Mhm.
these little ideas and then just staying with it, letting it open up, raise all these like questions, rub up against the constructs in me, and then take me down all these roads of study. It's been just incredibly like fruitful and satisfying.
One thing that occurs to me, which is also part of this, whatever it is we're talking about, is that Hillman, one way to put it would say that he stimulates analogical thinking, and
Hmm.
and and because he was constitutionally outside of the academy, and I know he taught, but he's not constrained by any of the departmental structure of the modern academy. Um, there's the obvious, and the same applies to Jung in a slightly different way. There's neither one of them will tell you, oh, that's German Romanticism. You can't study that because you're a molecular biologist. They don't make those kinds of moves. And so if you see something that looks analogically similar in 12th century Italian literature, you can just go there and then
Hmm.
come back. And so that's my vision of intellectual heaven, and maybe literal heaven is.
Hmm.
Let me riff on that for a second, because it's that's one of the enormous attractions of Henri Corbin's medieval cosmology. People, this trust me, this can be made to work. That Corbin's cosmology, with his hierarchies of angels, is built on correspondences between this world and other worlds. And in Corbin's cosmology, it's kind of heaven and earth, that kind of simplicity. But my argument it has been that if Ibn Arabi, for instance, had been aware of complex dynamical systems theory or post-Newtonian mathematics, he would have said, "Oh, n-dimensional spaces. Oh, great!" Because this begins to give me some tools which I didn't have in the 12th century to explain my spiritual experiences.
Hmm.
They didn't have those tools, but if they had, it would have allowed them to make these transcendent worlds more accessible to a modern mind. You see what I'm trying to get at?
Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview. Yeah, I see what you're getting at, and you could say the same of like Sankhya or the yogis with their cosmologies and their wonderful systems of like imaginal, the chakras, Kundalini, all of these kind of metaphoric images. And I would just say, like, I don't know if we need to take that anywhere else. Like, I think like keeping it in the imagistic, the imaginal, actually is a more helpful way in for someone like me than a complex systems theory,
Oh yeah,
physics,
no, you don't have to do
which seems to
that.
abstract
No,
it.
yeah, no. Let me. Yeah, this gets so. This is really fun to think about because it's really hard. I mean, and it's hard because we're very finite little creatures, and I used to think, along with Hegel, I suppose, that the human mind could understand reality, and I don't think that
No,
anymore.
no,
Yeah, no, that ain't gonna happen. Um, and so you have to have this huge dose of humility, and as part of that, what I've been through this process many times now. Uh, Grabbing onto science, speaking very generally, science as a reductionist, simplifying mode of conceiving reality. So I've been through it and out of it, and in it and out of it. And it's like being in a complex and then being out of the complex,
hmm
And I
the
finally,
scientist complex. Yeah.
yeah. Or it's a dogmatism. It's a
hmm
reduction. It's a vision. I was just reading Tyson Yunkaporta's Sand Talk.
hmm
He's an indigenous Aboriginal from Australia, and I haven't gotten too far in the book, but it seems to me to be brilliant. And he says, yeah, modern world, by which he means the modern Western world, they love to simplify things, and the world isn't simplifiable. And so the takeaway here that I'm trying to get to is that there's certainly for me and for many people, there's such a um, aura of precision and accuracy and truth around the sciences. And I know from experience, if you let that get you, you're screwed. And it takes a long time to crawl back out. But thanks to Hillman and Corban and a lot of very hard work and plenty of other people, poets and artists and whatnot, I'm increasingly able to dip back down into thinking about things scientifically. And it's very true. I used to be a hard-nosed Darwinian reductionist, although I didn't actually know it at the time, but I absolutely was. And I got to say, it's really hard. You can be one even if you never went to college.
hmm
You can be a hard-edged Darwinian reductionist if you think that um, um, that our ideas are in the mind, they're in the brain,
Hmm.
because where else would they be? Because that's reductionism, that's physicalist reductionism.
Yeah, the consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people just, I mean, I don't know how
That's just kind
many.
of that's accepted for
Yeah,
by a
it's
lot of
just the
people.
way.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's just the way reality is, and it was that kind of thing that was flipping out my student. Oh
Hmm.
my God. I mean, just a totally, and my experience over decades has been it's really hard for some people, depending on how you were raised and how you were trained and where you grew up. It's once that reductionism has got you, and it can be really hard to take things like the reality of Eros as a divine being, to take that really seriously. So this is all by way of responding to your my perception of your unenthusiasm for doing complex systems theory. Yeah, no, you don't have to do that. But if
Hmm.
you've done
Yeah,
complex
yeah.
systems
Hmm.
theory, and then you look at Ibn Arabi, you think, hmm, that's cool. And that's fine, as long as you don't take either one of them as having the truth.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
on the one hand, you'll be, a Muslim terrorist, and on the other hand, you'll become a Silicon Valley terrorist. You know, yeah.
Yeah,
And
a
so,
techno-fascist. Yeah.
yeah, a techno-fascist, exactly, precisely.
Yeah, but they can
And
be in
this is,
dialogue together, and maybe one can help the other. And I've kind of done the same thing with like shamanism and depth psychology. It's
yeah,
they're kind of like different ways of seeing the world, different models, but I found them actually like quite compatible, and they've helped me kind of bridge the divide in my own mind and thinking, which is less scientific, I guess. But I've had mystical experiences, and then trying to like parse them and understand them without co-opting another indigenous cosmology or something, which was impossible for me. But for me, imaginal psychology, Hillman, has been really helpful in allowing me to kind of dance in both worlds and not get too caught by one or the other.
yes, and I think in retrospect, that's exactly what it did for me. And the Henri Corbin, which lasted, I'm, I'll never get rid of him. I keep saying,
Hmm.
that's it. That's the last time I'm ever going to talk about Corbin. And no,
No,
it's never going
he's
to.
on your tree.
He is my tree, or he's darn close to it. And what he gave me, what it's an interesting triad, Jung, Hillman, and Corbin, because they all thought that imagination was the centrally important aspect of reality. Period. End of story. But each of them had their own particular inflections, which don't always agree.
Hmm.
And so what apparently, and for years I didn't know why I couldn't put Corbin down. It's because he opened up the religious imagination to me in a way that Hillman couldn't possibly do. I mean, Hillman's got this antipathy towards spirituality, or at least
Yes.
he always claimed to. And this
Hmm.
has always been interesting to me. Here's history. I read Corbin for a number of years, and I sat down to write a paper on Corbin, because I had to write something, because I'd read all this stuff and it was just this mishmash. And so I sat down to write a paper once we moved to Maine, and suddenly it was like 15 pages, and then it was, oh shit, and pretty soon it was pretty long. And I thought, well, that's kind of nice. That's a short book, and I had never written a short book except one about the penis of fleas. And so I thought, I sent it out to Hillman, because I knew Spring Publications at the time. This is back in the days when he and Jay Livernois were running Spring Publications together. And here's the story. So I sent it to them, and this is the old days, so pages of TypeScript, and sent it off to him. And it wasn't too long before I got a note from James Hillman, who I'd never met, and he said, "This is great. We will publish it." And I was just
Nice.
sitting in a little house in Maine, and I'd quit my academic job, and I didn't have a PhD in anything but flea weenies, you know. And they said, "Well, this is a great book. We'll publish it." And I won't go into details, but things happened administratively with Spring Publications, and it was like 5.5 years before the book got published. Um, but one, and then in the subsequent years when I published other books, and Hillman never saw my last one, which I'm sorry about because I think he would have liked it the best. He kept liking my books, and I kept thinking, but they're about Henri Corbin, and I mean they're about a lot of things, including Hillman. But I was always kind of puzzled because what I was getting from Corban was the religious imagination in a peculiar way. And I was always a little struck, and I have answers to it that I've made up now, by the fact that Hillman, who really had antipathy towards certain kinds of spirituality, liked
Yeah.
these books anyway. And of course, I suppose it should make sense because he thought Corbin was just magnificently wonderful. And
Hmm.
so there was always, I think there's always been a very complex relation between Hillman and religion. And he
Yeah.
admits as much in some of his essays.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, he early on he went to India and went up the mountain to meet the guru and ended up doing that commentary on Gopi Krishna's Kundalini book. So the interest was there, but publicly he did have such a bias against spirituality, metaphysics, nailing things down into ontologies and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But like he was also like prone to exaggeration. He said it's not worth
Yes.
speaking unless you're willing to exaggerate to make a point. And he
That's
felt
one of
that
my
like
favorite quotes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
especially when he's coming up in the 80s and 90s, there was so much focus on like new age spirituality and cosmologies and the different models of, whatever metaphysical models, that he was like compensating for that by speaking just purely about soul, keeping it to the images, to the imaginal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I loved that in him. One of the things that was hard for me initially, but then I began to see more clearly, is in one of the essays, more than one, where he's talking about spirit versus soul. He says, well, what is spirit? Well, it's like philosophy or theology or science. And and that was strange to me because this was like a crossing of boundaries, but. And then I thought, no, he's totally right. I like abstract ideas in science. I like abstract ideas in theology. Well, kind of. And I do see what he means by spirit being philosophical and abstract and
Mental.
disembodied, and
Mhm.
and 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 that was super helpful in my
High
own
flying, big
development.
picture, all that stuff. And yeah. Yeah,
And
Peaks
I
and
love
Veils.
that stuff.
Peaks and
Yeah.
Veils is one of my favorite essays. It's one every time I go back to it, there's just something more there. I feel it contains like such a core of his philosophy.
I mean, he's hard to read just simply because there's so much in there, you
Yeah.
know. Oh, here's a good one. I have read his book Anima, the Anatomy of a Personified Notion, more times than I can remember. And my paperback copy of it, I don't think there's a word in there that isn't circled or underlined. And I have no idea what's in that book,
That's
you
a
know?
tough one. I'm still not ready for that one. Yeah.
Every time I read it with so much passion and interest, and I get to the end and think, what was that? And let me rant for a second. There's a line in the song Isis by Bob Dylan that reminds me of that feeling. He says, I still can't remember all the best things she said.
Hmm.
It's like,
Yeah. Anima.
I still can't remember the best things she said. And
Because
when
that's
Hillman's at
like,
his best, it's just like,
But that's counter to the nature of anima, like trying to grasp onto something, trying to pin it down, trying to define it. It's like
Yeah,
why he would always resist defining soul when people would ask him, like,
yeah.
"You wrote this book, Soul's
What are you
Code. Like,
talking
what is
about?
soul?" And he'd just go off, and he's like, "Well, it's more of like a quality than a substance, and
Yeah.
here are some things that might point toward it, but it's all about experience."
And so if you if you want, well, sure, we can segue into my recent experiences in Brazil
Well, before we
because,
go there though, I did want to
yeah.
like stick with this a little bit about like Corban and Hillman. It came up in a James Hillman Facebook group recently. Someone was looking for like anyone who could point them toward a writing or lecture where Hillman gave his like ontology. And I thought, well, I think that's going to be really hard to find. And I was trying to parse out because I'm like a non-academic. I didn't study philosophy. So ontology is one of those like gauzy words that I'm not really sure what it means. But
Right.
my feeling for it is like cosmology is a story that helps you make sense of the world. It somehow explains like the beautiful ordering of the world, but it's not claiming to be a truth. It's something that an individual might find beautiful. And then ontology is trying to be more scientific about it, like trying to get it down to its component parts and explain things. And I thought like Hillman was much more interested in cosmologies,
Yeah.
plural,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
than
no,
in ontology.
I think that's right. I mean, and I don't even yeah, it's been a long time since I officially studied philosophy, which is both a little bit good and a little bit bad. So I don't know what even I mean, ontology is a study of being and what kind of beings there are.
Mm.
And it can be it can go off wrong and become uninteresting really fast, which is because we don't know anything. um, and so I like your definition. I mean, and that's the one that I think I probably work with. Cosmology is tinged with myth.
Hmm.
I mean, in practical use, unless you're an astronomer, and that's a separate issue, we're not talking to those people. Although, of course, astronomy and cosmology in the scientific sense have their own mythologies, they just don't know it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the problem with a lot of
yeah,
religions is they don't
yeah,
know they're
yeah,
talking mythology.
yeah. No, no, that's well, yes, it's so. Um, so Hillman's ontology, yeah, no, he didn't have one in that sense. I mean, there is the volume of the collected, whatever it is, on philosophical intimations, which has got a nice intro by Ed Casey. Um, and I read everything in there? No. But I do recall from years ago that somewhere in there there's an essay in which he's talking to Ed, I think, or maybe not. And in any case, he says, yeah, under certain circumstances, you do kind of need an ontology. I guess he says
Or a
cosmology.
cosmology.
You
Yeah.
need a cosmology, and he'd be happy to have it pointed out to him that you do have one, James. It may just simply be incoherent. At which point, and that's what a philosopher would say, that you have one, it's probably incoherent, and your life would be better, maybe, if your ontology were more coherent. And like Walt Whitman, Hillman would say, "I contradict myself. Fine,
Hmm.
I don't have a problem with that." And so in the strict sense, no, he didn't have an ontology, but in a practical sense, he kind of did, which was that which is following in Jung's footsteps. What the primary reality is image, and then of
Hmm.
course, if you're a stickler or you're a philosopher, you say, well, by image, and it's very much everything,
Yeah.
and what, yeah, but you see what that does to you. It's like taking your first phenomenology course. You suddenly recognize that you're recognizing. That is to say, you suddenly stand back and you think, well, what the? Because I remember doing this reading Hillman. gosh, by image, I mean, Jung says you're never not in psyche. And that means that you're always in an image. And if you know, see, Hillman, as maybe more explicitly than Jung, and Jung, when he's being good, is really a poet. They're, you know, the poetic basis of mind. I mean, when
Mm,
Hillman reads Jung saying it's all image, he says, ah, he's arguing for the poetic basis of mind. And if you if you if you are able to hold yourself as I imagine poets and artists hold themselves, you're not looking for an anchor.
mhm.
You're happy to be sailing. And
Yeah.
so you use your ontology or your phenomenology or your, in my case, natural science to help you see things.
Mhm.
You know, as soon as you notice an insect and fall in love with it, you start seeing them everywhere because they are everywhere. And suddenly, I mean, quite literally, your world changes
Mhm.
and everything is just oh shit under this rock. Oh my god. Under I could spend the rest of eternity under this rock, or thinking through this particular angelology of Corban, or doing analysis with people in the Jungian way and following their dream. All of those things. And the miracle, one of the miracles is without knowing it, we make those shifts all the time. And my typical one is you wake up in the morning and you have to be a literalist in order to make your coffee, you know?
Mhm.
and well, to and then you read, then you watch the news or however you know, and then you play with your children. And each of those things, if you're paying really close attention, requires what you might call a different skill set. Or if you're Hellman, you know, it's a different mode of psyche. And if you're Corban, it might even be a different mode of being. And we're not
Yeah.
sensitive to that.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things that, Hillman and psychedelics can help with is seeing through the literal material presentation of the world into the underlying layer of like archetypal meaning, image. So I could be making my coffee and go, yeah, here are the coffee grounds and 2 scoops in and then hot water and French press it. But I could also be saying, I gotta wake up my Mars today because I got a lot of shit to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Which has got a
that's right.
different feeling to it. It's got like
Which
another
has a
layer to it.
whole different that yes, that's yes. And we do that kind of thing all the time. And I just one of the things that Hellman says, you know, I don't know, maybe he says it many, many, many times, but I even forget which book it was in that it really stuck with me. Um, and it took me years to really start to be able to, can I say live it? Do I really live it? I'm getting closer. He says literalism is a mode of imagining.
Yeah.
Now, if you come from the sciences, that's like you risk losing your mind
Yeah.
if you believe that. And I saw it on the page and I knew it, you know, that's great. I knew it, you know, you could see intellectually that, oh my God, oh, of course that follows from everything that he and Jung are saying about image and psyche. And of course that follows, but really? And of course, if you've done any Eastern philosophy, and I haven't, it's right there. It's in Buddhism. Everything is illusion.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
Um,
nice theory, but to actually have the experience is a different thing. But if you've had the experience, then you read that and you go, well, yeah, of course.
Yeah, and if you're the sort of person that I was and still am, I'm getting old here, so it better loosen up pretty soon. I'm far looser than I was, but for some people,
Careful what you wish
careful
for.
what you hope for. For some people like me, um, man, that's hard.
Mhm.
Literalism is a motive to. I mean, intellectually, I got it.
Mhm.
And on a good day, I really have it. And yet, I always have a stone with me for, because if you take any of this stuff seriously, then the question of the reality of really real things, and in my personal mythology, rocks are those things. You don't get any realer, any more fundamental than a rock. And I got wildly enthusiastic about geology for a few years, for what I think were probably deep alchemical reasons. But it does, you know. And then if you study rocks, they start to dissolve because they become interesting and beautiful and complicated and they move in time.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And they got a whole story. Like that rock there was formed by probably some river, and how, what was it made of? It's like all these
mhm.
crustaceans and just, ground into sand. And like, oh my
Yeah,
God, you like
it,
biology, you can get really fractal with it, just like you can with like archetypal psychology, right? Like it just keeps
yes,
unfolding and unfolding
it
this
just
huge
keeps
story. And
unfolding.
it's like what Blake's universe in the grain of sand,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's exactly that. And yet you can still hit somebody in the head with it, and it doesn't
It'll
matter
make it
which
dead.
culture they cut. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether they grew up in the Amazon or in Manhattan. You can still kill them with it. And so
Yeah.
there's some residual, you know,
It's like the Zen
it's
master going, "Oh, you think this is an illusion? Bonk."
poof. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, yeah, and that
It's a yeah,
is
it's like yes and thinking, which the Western
it.
mind is so.
Yeah,
That's what we got to like really kind of
yeah,
untangle. I think
yeah,
if we're going to open to the world in this kind of way, in like what Ben Sells has been calling the imaginal animism, which I love. I
yeah.
think he's nailed it there because it requires
Oh,
imagination to open into an animistic worldview and experience.
yeah, yeah. It's because the whole thing is into so one of the yeah the whole thing is animated. It's animism all the way down, and what makes it animism is the fact that let's see, how do you want to say this? I mean, in Corban's world, it's perfectly legitimate to say that there are persons everywhere in a very Neoplatonic sense. There's a wonderful passage in Corban's book on Ibn Arabi where he quotes Proclus. I think maybe maybe he got this directly from Proclus, or he also talks about Marsilio Ficino's translation of Proclus.
Mm.
But Proclus talks about the prayer of the heliotrope, which is a flower which follows the sun across the sky as if praying to his Lord. And
Oh, I
Proclus
love it.
says, every organism, every rock, every crystal has a Lord to whom they pray. And, so for the Neoplatonists, yeah,
Yeah.
it's life and from Corbin's point of view, it would be personhood. Even a rock
Hmm.
has a little tiny bit of personhood. I mean, the theological reason for that is because God is the ultimate person and he made all this stuff, or she, or whoever,
Or
or
it's
it.
made of it.
It's made of it. So it's all got what we call personality in it.
Hmm.
And it's as you were saying, it's part of the same movement of both and that lets you see the the fluidity of consciousness.
Hmm.
Yeah, it isn't even consciousness. We're
Fluidity of
leading.
reality and consciousness's relationship to it, maybe
Yeah, yeah,
flowing
yeah.
together.
And I mean, one of the things that becomes difficult the more the I mean, I am a little closer now to grasping some of these things than I ever have been. But they're ungraspable, and that's what you're grasping.
Mm.
I'm
The
beginning to see that.
ungraspability.
Yeah, I'm beginning to see that. Oh, you can't. No, it's just not. But and when when you genuinely can say that you see just maybe a little bit the reason that this just isn't possible to be spoken about, um, then you begin to see both the advantages and disadvantages of language or
Hmm.
ideation
Yeah.
or or the limitations and affordances of your particular sensibilities. And you realize that, oh, I don't have access to that because I haven't yet developed the thought of the heart. Whereas
Yeah.
I have pretty good access to what this rock is made of.
Yeah.
And when you start to see that, everything begins to, you can't say, well, you see, you can't say very much about it.
Yeah, this is really good. I think like the thought of the heart idea was easy for me to get when I read it, when, you know, Hillman was talking about a Corban, because the yoga tradition that I came up in was so heart focused. Like
Mm,
our root teacher would always say, you got to make the heart the boss. The mind has to be a servant to the heart. And so it was all about getting you into that heart space. And so I did this whole long study of like, what is the spiritual heart? Like, what is this experience of being in the heart that is kind of ineffable? And the thing that helps me understand it is I think of the heart as the sense organ of the soul. And
mhm.
it's like pre-linguistic, sub-linguistic or something. But my mind wants so much to kind of put things into words. So there's like, for me, the thought of the heart, which is like a sensing that is really hard to put into words, and then the thought of the mind, which really wants to like attach language to that experience in order, I think, to communicate it, because I think
Yeah.
that's part of our reason for being here, is to communicate this stuff. Like, why did we get up off all fours and start walking on two legs? Well, it wasn't just so that we could reach apples in the trees or to make tools. I think it was so that we could create art. And so I see that as like our role here on earth is to be artists and to reflect back the beauty of the world through the things that we can make and speak and sing and dance.
That's about perfect as far as I'm concerned. And that's, yeah.
Good.
Um,
Solid ontology.
yeah.
Is that-
Oh, I think, yeah, no, I actually think so. And yeah, I don't want to, this sounds like I'm throwing cold water on it, but trust me, but
Throw
trust me,
your cold, your bucket of science on it, or I don't know.
yeah, yeah, I'm going to throw a bucket of science on it, but honestly, um, I got I'm a terrible scientist because there's a there are ways of doing. I mean, science is such a bad word.
Yeah.
There are ways of thinking and exploring the world systematically, which overlap with what we call science and are completely compatible with the things that we call the arts. Okay.
Or
There's,
spirituality.
or
Hmm.
spirituality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Around the fringes of spirituality, you find terrorism, or at least around the fringes of religion, and around the fringes of science. Oh, well, all sorts of horrible things go. But but trust me, there are ways of doing natural history. There are ways of doing natural history, which in fact require the thought of the heart. And you could argue that where the sciences go off wrong is they lose the thought of the heart and
Mm.
they let the head run everything. And,
Well,
and so there is,
the hypothesis has to start in imagination, right? Like it has to start with some kind of hunch that you
it's all
then seek
imagination.
to
Yes.
prove, which
Yeah.
the proof part is, I think, where Western science gets hung up.
Yeah. That's right.
Right. Whereas spirituality would be like, well, what do you mean you prove it? Go in. Actually, the most important thing is to have the experience. And if this model doesn't fit that experience, well, okay, it's all provisional. Don't get hung
It's
up on it.
yeah, well, no, that's right. And the very greatest scientists who think philosophically about what they're doing, they know it's all hypotheses.
Right.
Some hypotheses are extremely well confirmed, and thank God for it, because otherwise you'd never be able to cross a bridge. There are, or make your coffee for that matter.
Yeah.
But but it goes off wrong when, as Tyson Yunkaporta says, when
Hmm.
you oversimplify. You know, a certain degree of simplification is absolutely required for building bridges, making coffee, raising tomatoes. Certain degree of oversimplification is, and it kind of varies how much is needed for whatever is the task at hand.
Totally.
But when you let your ability to do stuff run wild, which is pretty much, then it goes off wrong real fast.
Yeah. And you could even look at that as like the ego or the persona is a simplified version of who you are that you need in order to interface with the world and other
That's
people.
nice.
It's like
That's
we
nice.
we meet and we can talk about like here's what I did, here's what I do, here's who I am, all that, here's my history and all that stuff. But we know there's a lot more under the surface, right? And
Yeah.
it'd
Yeah.
take a long study, a natural history of Tom or Brian to like even get a wider picture than the what we present.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really, that's, yeah. What were you saying before about we needed to communicate? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
the need, yeah, why do we got to bring the thought of the heart
right.
into the thought of the head or the language of the mind to
It's
communicate it?
interesting. We just yeah. One thing. I mean, I have always been, since I was quite young, a creature of the mind. And in Jung's terms, I'm a thinking type. And
Hmm.
Jung is quick to point out that if you're a thinking type, doesn't mean you think well. It just means that
It's
you
your default.
that's your default, and that is certainly me. And I've known that for a very, very long time. And so when I'm expostulating about the thought of the heart and Corban and Hillman,
It's
you know,
aspirational.
yeah, it's oh, absolutely. My books were all
Yeah.
aspirational, and to one degree or another, I was pretty well aware of it at the time. And I think you could, I think you could make that argument about Hillman. Talking about how wonderful it is to let go of the ego.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, 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 um, yeah. There's that, and so it's always true, or at least it's true for many, many people who write in these modes, that they're aspirational. This is what I see this. This is something I would like to get to. And then the closer you get to it, in my case, not terribly close, but closer, I don't have the obsessive need to write about it anymore. But what we're trying to get to
Yeah.
is the need to communicate the inexpressible. And what I was going to say is that in my teaching over the last several years, which is all Corban and Hillman and imagination, and all this other stuff, I often have artists and poets in my class, and I feel bad, and I think, oh my gosh, these people, they already know what I'm talking about.
Right. I
You know,
don't want to
there's
wreck their thing.
yeah, I don't want to, you don't have to think like this, but what I have been told a few times by such people is, no, Tom, this is good because you're giving me language
Mhm.
in which to explain my own experiences to myself.
Yeah,
And I thought, okay, all right, that's fine. This is useful anyway.
totally.
Whereas
And
I'm
that's
trying
where
to get where they are.
yeah, yeah. Well,
You
yeah,
know?
you're coming at it from one way or the other, I think, and that's what I was talking about when like having had all these kind of wild spiritual experiences and needing a way to like understand them in my context. That's where like Jung and Hillman and Thomas
Yeah.
More came in really, really handy, and it allowed me to I don't know, expand myself to allow like those experiences to be like absolutely real. in those experiences, I'm not questioning if that's really Saint Michael or Iemanjá or whoever I encounter in those experiences. When I'm in the experience, I'm with them. They're real. We're engaged. We're dialoguing. Whatever's happening is happening. And then when I come out of it, I would notice that my rational mind would want to like kick in and like psychologize it or something, or it's just the imagination. And so like these thinkers really help me to expand that. So it's like in it, it's real. And also like, it's kind of in me too. It's part of my psychology because my psychology is not separate from the anima mundi, the psyche of the world, but it's my personal experience of these archetypal energies. And they're appearing to me in a particular way because they're wanting to present themselves in a way that's going to grab me or resonate with me or something. Right. And so like all of this is going on and it's incredibly complex and it's incredibly kind of personal, but at the same time, it's got that underlayer of the universal. So I think if we can like see that way, we can talk to anybody and we can enter into any
Yeah.
tradition and see the beauty of it, see the kind of the wisdom and intelligence in it. Like someone told me once, when I was wrestling with this stuff, they're like, well, look, a mystic is at home in any church because you're feeling into the deeper layers and the presentation, you can see it as just kind of like a beautiful human expression of the ineffable nature, right? So that really helped me just kind of relax into the whole thing. And it required like a real kind of expansion.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody yesterday, I think it was. We we need a framework. And I don't necessarily mean a rigid iron framework. How about just a weaving, a basket? So Hillman doesn't provide you Le Corbusier's, doesn't provide you
A
a
brutalist
building.
structure
Yeah,
to
yeah,
rely
he
on.
yeah he provides a holding pen, and the
Mhm.
word that keeps coming up is permission. You
Well,
know,
what he does, first of all, is he's a deconstructionist. So he raises the ground first, and then he gives you,
yeah,
I think, some materials in which you can start to assemble your own frame or structure.
yeah.
Keeping
All
in
right,
mind that it's
that's
always provisional. It always needs to be renovated and upgraded, and a
yeah,
typhoon will come by and knock it down again. And
yeah,
okay, so
yeah,
if you can live
yeah,
with
and
that, you're going to be okay.
yeah, that's right. I mean, I still, the fact that I ran into Hillman was, I mean, perfect
He's like a guru for
because
you, maybe,
yeah, yeah.
Not
He served a
in a
purpose.
devotional sense, but in someone who
No,
comes along and like really helps to blast some things out of you.
yeah, I mean, he gave me a very loosely woven framework, rather than, my psyche's as complicated and
Yeah,
screwed up as
here's a
anybody else's.
diagram of the self, and here's like I hate those Jungian diagrams. Like you guys,
Oh, no, occasionally I would like them, and I'm just stuck with the fourfold, thinking, feeling, intuiting, and saying I'm stuck with that forever. I can't get rid of
uh,
it. Which
it's
is,
not bad as a kind of a yeah, it's not bad as a starting
it's not
place.
bad. It's okay, but I'm kind of annoyed that I'm stuck with it. Something in me
Some things
has
just
to.
won't fit in it though. You
Some
gotta
things
like
just,
you gotta
yeah.
slice up that pie a little more
I
narrowly.
mean, I know theoretically that it's not good, but I keep
But the thing is,
reverting
look,
to it.
it's simple. If you understand that it's a simplified map of reality or model of the psyche or whatever, okay. As long as you understand that it's like super simplified, it's like a
Yeah,
compass, north, west, east, it's four
yeah.
directions. And we all know that you could like fractalize that to an infinite degree. But like we need something to start working with, right?
Yeah, so here's the thing that is on my mind right now because I was articulating it to a couple different people. So my background insofar it has a lot of Hillman and Corban and soul and all these other words. They have become slightly ossified. Is that true? Insofar as you can ever ossify Hillman, sure. I have a little version. I got the elevator version of James Hillman, and he's in my head. And if I need something more complicated, that's in there too. But I have these categories and ideas that have come from all these years. And we're reading a book by Manuel Kocha in the class we're doing right now. And needn't go into detail. It's his new book called Home, A Philosophy of the Home. Subtitle is Domesticity and Happiness. And I'm an enormous fan of Emmanuel Kocha, so I'm a fanboy. So you just have to put up with it. This book for me, in the first three chapters, which is all I've managed to drag myself through because it's just flipping me out, I think it's a good example of just what we're talking about. Um, one of the people in the class, I was so excited yesterday. I was doing lots of analogical thinking, and I was trying to bring Koch's ideas and compare them to Hillman and Corban and Ivan Illich and Clarice Lispector and whoever else I could bring in because I love to do that. It's map making. It's a kind of spontaneous cartography. Here's what I see from where I am now standing. And having Kocha, we're supposed to be reading his book, but I'm by default bringing his cartography and trying to see how it maps onto mine. And one of the students said in the Q&A afterwards, he said, "Well, this whole thing about," he said, "Coach, isn't it just Hillman's idea of soul?" And just totally stopped me, and I thought because I was so excited about Kocha, and I really had to think about it, and I don't have a conclusion, but what I realized by having it thrust at me that simplistically was yes and no. And this becomes really interesting then. So, the way Hillman uses soul, which he never defines and which has all sorts of analogies, and now for me, what do you call them? Auras and connotations and all that. And then what Coach is doing, brand new to me, and some of it maps onto soul and some of it doesn't. And then just and this is what I mean, this is the communicating part, where I want to say to my student, no, it's not Hillman's soul. It's some of it, yeah. Other bits, maybe. And then there's these places where there's some difference, and you go right to there.
Mm-hmm.
You go right there, and you say, "Oh, this is interesting. So here's how the world looks from Coach's viewpoint, and and it's in that mismatch that magic can happen, and you might even." In an artistic and poetic way, you might even be spurred into an experience.
Yeah.
Because these are not ideas; they are perspectives.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're feeling some tension between the two, that may be like a third, your own perspective coming through or emerging. And so, like a lot of what Hillman would do is like bricolage, right? Like is taking
Yeah,
this and this and this. How do they fit together for me? And he's leaping around in this puer way from idea to idea.
yeah,
And
I
if
love
you
that
zoom
stuff.
back, yeah, there's like the gestalt of like Hillman-esque.
Yeah,
But you start to zoom in on it, and it's like that fractal thing where, like, David Hasselhoff is wearing a David Hasselhoff T-shirt of a guy wearing, and you keep zooming in, and it's David
yeah,
Hasselhoff's all the way down,
yeah,
or
yeah,
something like that. But it just
yeah,
gets
yeah,
more
yeah,
complex the more you zoom
yeah.
in. But if you pull out and you think you've got it by saying like, well, Hillman's idea of soul, it's like, wait a minute, which one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What on what day?
I mean, it's a delight to meet someone who understands Hillman in the way in which I understand him. That is to
Hmm.
say, as a kind of diversifying and complexifying energy.
He's a complex system.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he was. Yeah, but don't do that because, well, yeah, but you could. He's a mythologically complex system.
Well, I love,
Exactly.
listening to his lectures where he'd be like bringing in new ideas that he hasn't completely worked over yet. And
Oh, yeah.
maybe somebody would, maybe it was Ed Casey in the audience would bring up some perspective from his deep philosophical scholarship. And him will go, yeah, well, I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
So there
right.
was an openness there. I really love that about him because it's
Yeah,
rare in kind of public thinkers or writers, right? To have the guts to go up and say like, yeah, I don't know, I'm working through this stuff, or it's like a work in progress or something.
well, the way, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's confirming and interesting to hear you say that Hillman was, making those kinds of analogical connections, and maybe that's what he. I'm just making this up. Maybe that's what he recognized that in my books, and that's what he
Mm-hmm.
liked is that kind of style because that turns out to be my natural style. And you don't know, you're not. It's I don't even know what it is. It's you're not looking for certainty. You're looking for beauty, and I think you're looking for life. You're just looking to feel as alive as possible. I think that's been my motivation all along.
Yeah,
And
but it's also
these,
the interest too, right? Like if you have that the eros, the creating the inter essay, that attraction to the world, you're going to start seeing those connections everywhere, and the more those connections are made, the more kind of like affirming it is, or
yeah,
something like it's exciting, it's enlivening. That's what I get from his writing for sure. Like I still read it and I'm like, God, these ideas are so exciting to me. Like something in me is kind of leaping for joy to be hearing
yeah,
this from
yeah,
somebody I respect and who I know has like the kind of scholarly chops. Like he did a
yeah,
deep dive on so many things. And then he could just kind of like dance around and like perform like a juggler or something, you know?
yeah, yeah. And I, I find I've always found that incredibly his masterful handling of pretending to be a scholar, which he actually was, or certainly could have been. Because I love all the scholarly references, and I love the
Yeah.
fact that he was multilingual, and that kind of thing always impresses me. And then what he did with it was to, to play in this most
Hmm.
serious possible way,
Yeah.
and that's almost unheard of.
Yeah, yeah, I think about that often when reading or listening to him. There is the playfulness there, but it's he's serious about these ideas too. And so it's like something my yoga teacher used to tell me, he's like, take your yoga practice seriously, but not without humor.
Yeah, yeah,
Right, and you can
yeah,
do both. It's like Frank Zappa, a journalist asked him because they were kind of questioning him about the validity of his music. Should we take it seriously? Because he would write these classical orchestra pieces, and then he'd write like "Don't eat the yellow snow," And
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
so they'd say like, "Mr. Zappa, does humor belong in music?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. Is it possible to laugh while having sex?" And it's all up to the way the person answers it to whether they can
Yeah,
take
yeah,
him
right.
seriously without, not
Yeah, yeah,
humorlessly. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so he's been extremely important for
Yeah.
for for
Um, I'm really interested to hear a little bit from you about your recent excursions into the plant medicine world. Because,
yeah,
for me, it was like all the psychedelics and plant medicine and mystical experience first. Hillman
mm,
really helping me out, kind of live this stuff in the day world and all that more, and finding like kind of kinship in his ideas and Jung's ideas. It's kind of like modern mystic types. Um, but for you, it was kind of like a late initiation into this stuff, like in your late
yeah.
60s, right? After
73.
after already being
Yeah.
like immersed in Jung and Hillman and Corban,
Yeah.
and then
So,
you get like the Iboga experience. You're like, I
yeah.
want to know what
So,
you.
do you want to know about this? Okay. We'll do this as okay.
Well, I don't
So
need the
the
whole like detailed
no,
story because you've done
no,
podcasts about that. But
you
like,
can't get it. But for me, I had never done. I mean, back in 1970, I did a lot of hashish, which was a very bad idea, but that was all. Um, and I never touched anything besides alcohol for many decades. And then I got old, and they legalized marijuana in Maine, and so I tried some of that, and oof, nuh-uh. Did me no good whatsoever. And then I grew some mushrooms, grew some psilocybin, and I took a massive dose of those, all on my own. No ceremony, just massive doses after
yeah,
dinner.
you're a big boy.
Uh, yeah, because I figured I'm 71. This was a couple years ago. I'm 71. I've been through hell. I don't, I mean, it's whatever happens. It couldn't be any worse than a lot
Dude,
of
you
the
can
weird
roll with
shit.
it. Yeah, yeah.
I can roll with it. So I took like 6 grams of dried mushrooms that I grew myself, and all I got was Grateful Dead posters. I just got all the
Mm.
visuals, and that was it. And I thought, well, shit, that's kind of boring. So I did it a few more times, and it was pretty much the same thing. And and then I had reason to be, well, short version, short. My friend in Brazil who was taking my classes he said it is actually after the fact. He said, "You were talking about the the imagination, and Hillman and Corban." He says, "And I knew you didn't know what you were talking about, and you needed to come down to Brazil and get some of the real stuff." And so he invited me down to do Iboga, and I knew I knew that Iboga had a reputation for being fairly powerful, and I thought at the time, that's probably what I need. If I'm going to do anything, it ought to have the biggest hammer.
Well,
So
I'd
I
say
went down.
if you're like a head guy, if you're a big thinker like that, you need some like heavy duty medicine to like
I
crack
need,
that open.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was right. The short version, I've done it 3 times now. Short version. But it's really important to recognize that I started reading Jeffrey Kripal's books at the same time that I decided to go down to do the Iboga. And Kripal is all about the impossible and UFOs and paranormal. And it was a long story related to Corban and Hillman, but we won't do that. So I went down there and discovered the first time that I was just so full of resistances, my antipathy towards new age, weird, hippie type 60s things. I didn't know I had that, but I did. And this is a real ritual with people from West Africa and elsewhere doing the business. And so there's bells and whistles literally, and there's feathers and all the 60s stuff. And I just thought, this is bullshit. Then I finally had the drug, because that's what I went down there for. Finally took the plant. And the plant didn't like me very much and didn't give me very much. But I did get a little tiny taste of something quite pleasant afterwards. No details, but
Mm.
as soon as it was over, during it, I am never coming back. This is the worst thing that ever happened to me. Never coming back. As soon as it was over, I said, I'm coming back. So a year less
Mhm.
later, I went
Let me
back.
just add something there, because I did hear you talk about that experience, and that in that first one, you said you like blacked out for most of it, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
remember much happening. And what I found actually is that people who are of thinking types, thinking typology, let's say, kind of like, intelligent people with strong minds, sometimes what these intelligent plants need to do is knock Captain Ego the fuck out so
Oh,
that
yeah.
they can do some like deeper energetic work and not have you putting up those resistances and
Oh,
walls and
no,
stuff, right? So
absolutely.
just to say that Captain Ego may go, hey, I didn't get anything out of that, but like the energetic body probably got a whole lot of work
Oh,
done.
no, no, no. Yeah. I mean, if you want yeah, I'm just trying to get that done in 10 seconds.
Oh yeah, sorry.
It was extremely powerful. It wasn't anything like what I expect. Well, I didn't expect anything. But but I was so resistant at so many levels, and I was shown briefly an image that I interpret as those resistances, and then I just lost consciousness. But the next, at the end of the ceremony, I had an experience of what I can only say a little bit of heart opening, just a little.
Hmm.
But just enough to notice, and to even my head person, even the thinking self
Like
said,
recognizing, oh, what is this?
yeah, it was like, that's good. I'm coming
Mm,
back. It was like after 36 hours of stupid, hate it, awful, never coming back, bang, I'll be back. It was just like that.
hmm.
Second time, I still had to be opened up. I kind of don't even, yeah, the second time was difficult, really unpleasant. I did a lot of vomiting. It was 30, yeah, it was 36 hours of greatly unpleasant physical work. And in this one, I'd been broken down the first time. This one worked at a subliminal level on my physical self.
Hmm.
I was only semi conscious for most of it, but the parts that I do remember, it was working
A lot of
it
body
was
stuff.
working. Yeah, it was body stuff, and it was deep, black, tarry, horrible, nasty, deep psychic stuff. How the how the plants know this
I know.
is a mystery that no one will ever. But it was obviously, this was for me. And then I
Mm.
had some interesting, visions, ideas right at the very end, just a little bit.
Yeah, it
And,
gave you a little something on the way out. Just go, hey, here's a little.
little something on the way out.
You can play with this for
In
a
the
while.
Bwiti tradition, what happens often is that you meet figures and you get your spiritual name. So after the first time, another chance. Second time, did you meet anybody? No, I didn't meet anybody. It's just dark and miserable and awful. And so, but as soon as that one was over, during which I thought for 36 hours, I'm never coming back. This
Never
is
again.
so awful. Soon as it was over, it was like, I'm coming back. So I came back the
It's
third time.
amazing.
And the third time was even worse. it was it
Worse
was
slash better.
it was much worse. It was really, really bad. And we'd have to do the details, but it was very, very dark. It was
Mm.
apocalyptically horrible. And I was unconscious for most of it. And um, yet, at the end, um, I recognized consciously. I had an image. What could I say about this? Very little, really. But I did have an image of a figure that various and sundry people have told me was like Kali, the Hindu goddess of death. And yeah, okay, she didn't say who she was. She wasn't in a talking mood. Um, and she was the overseer of apocalypses, which I experienced an infinite number, which was very unpleasant.
Mm.
Um, but coming out of that, there was her on one side, and on the other side there was this empty space, and it was as if now's your chance to fill this other space. And there's more to it. Two things immediately. I'm coming back. Actually, no, it was, I don't know if I can do this again because that was just brutally awful. And now, months later, yeah, I will go back. I won't go
Mm.
back terribly enthusiastically, but I keep seeing these people that have these wonderful experiences, and mine are just worse and worse and worse and darker. But I think I might have hit rock bottom. And speaking from the head now, the amazing thing was the it took a couple of days before this dawned on me. The experience of multiple infinite apocalypses was mythic. And it slowly occurred to me, oh shit, that's what they mean by myth. It's like,
Hmm.
oh boy, it's like inhuman, non-human. It was just beyond anything, you
Hmm.
know.
But dude, like infinite apocalypse, isn't that like biology? Isn't that,
No, 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 because here's the business where any words you use are incapable of doing justice to, was it an experience? I don't know. I kind of wasn't there
well, Hillman
until
would say
I kind of,
one of the characteristics of soul is that it turns events into experiences.
that's fine. So look,
So was it an
so,
experience? Did it affect you?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Then
yeah.
it's an experience, I'd say.
Well, it was an experience when I showed up. Before I was there, it was not an experience. It was simply
An
cosmic
event.
reality of yeah, it was an event. Yeah, it was an
Yeah.
event, and one has the sense that these events go on at a level which has absolutely, utterly nothing whatsoever to do with anything any human being ever thinks or sees or says or experiences, and they're out there anyway. And then, if you're lucky or
Mm.
blessed or chosen or whatever, you get a little tiny pinhole onto it. And I know the history of mythologies and all, and I know other people have done the Iboga experience and come back with just utterly transformative experiences of cosmic love. And so I know that also is obvious, but my particular path is, and I'm perfectly willing to say that I needed the big hammer, and this is I kind of hope it's the end of the blow
Hmm.
because I'm going back again, man.
Depends on
But
if it's done its job of obliterating you
yeah, and
enough.
I think I think it may have come, you know, it may, yeah. I mean, I'm certainly willing to do it again.
Yeah.
Um,
Why not? You got
eh,
to see what's next. It's part of the story. Like, what
because
comes next?
well, look, if everybody who went to Gabon or Brazil or wherever to do Iboga, if everybody came
Go to
back
their neighborhood
totally
yoga studio.
annihilated, then I wouldn't do it. But so many, the end result for everybody I know of, and I know some people who've had very dark experiences with Iboga, the end result is positive.
Yeah, more freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But it gave so the thing that's underlying almost everything we've said for the last hour and a half is I now, maybe for the first time, or at least since I was very young, and that's another part of the story, I now have the memory of an experience which was beyond human conceptions and language. And I recognized afterwards that when you use the word mythology, this is the original object, that it's so easy, even
Oh, I know what
well,
you mean. Yeah,
you
like the
know,
idea that mythologies are stories that people way back when made up, but
yeah,
no, they're communicating their vision that they would
and they're
have.
transhuman. It gave me a renewed
Hmm.
respect for Hillman and
They're
Jung and
archetypal,
even
baby.
Freud. Yeah, they are archetypal, and human language invariably tames them.
Yeah, but the best, I mean, the poets, the musicians, the painters are the best at translating without taming, like keeping them
Yes,
wild. Yeah, yeah.
yes,
Not
yeah,
domesticating the vision of reality.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, that's it. And that's the
And
poetic basis of mind, right?
it is.
It's like
Who's
it's
I
the
could
or it's the psychic
was it
basis for poetry.
yeah, it was Robert Lowell, I think, who said that the job of the poet was to stand out in high hills in thunderstorms, hoping to be hit once or twice by lightning. And yeah, yeah, okay, I'll go with that. And
Yeah, it's
then
dangerous
maybe,
work. Yeah,
yeah,
you run the risk of annihilation,
yeah, you do.
exposing
And
yourself to those
that's why
energies.
they call it an initiation. It's not supposed to be easy. It's
Yeah, yeah,
supposed to be hard.
yeah. Something's got to die in order for it to be
Yeah,
a real initiation.
and I'm not dead yet.
Well,
I,
maybe that inner judge has been mashed down enough that he's a little more humble, and he won't go in there next time and like be going, yeah, this hippie bullshit.
yeah, no, I thought he was gone before I went down there the first time. And you can feel those resistances. And in my case, uh, I mean, you have to engage them. You can't just push them away. And so in my case, it's like, oh, it's just chemistry. It's just bark off the root of this goofy plant.
Yeah.
What the hell? None of this means anything. Actually, when in that vein,
Got to
reading
placate the judge long enough to get him into the experience. Go, no, no,
yeah,
no, no.
yeah,
Look, it's just chemistry, man. It's fine.
it's just chemistry. And say, no, 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 you come too. you know, uh, there's a quote that Jeff Kripal pulls from William James, which I should have known long ago, because William James was into all this mystical stuff, and people somebody said to him that it was all just brain chemistry, that these visions and ghosts and all this is just brain chemistry, and James said, yeah, but so is truth, so is mathematics. It's all just brain chemistry, man. So whether it's brain chemistry or not has no bearing on whether what you're experiencing is real or not.
I mean, that's so
Bingo.
silly, brain chemistry. Come on.
Oh, but it had me, man. It had me. Once you've done the Darwinian evolution for 4.5 billion years, once you're plugged into that way of understanding things, you're screwed.
Mm.
Because everything is explicable that way because so much is. So much
Yeah, I don't
is.
know. I can't get it. Yeah.
And don't try. I would
I
I would recommend that you not try.
I
And
see
I
what
start,
that's doing. I see what that's kind of thinking is doing to the world, and
yeah,
it's one of the things that drives me to, speak up for its antithesis or its antidote.
the trick, I mean, we don't have forever here, but the one of the one of the problems and one of the arguments for, and I don't mean you personally, but I mean culturally. One of the things is the humanists. Let's do that, which is so simplistic and false. But
Whatever that means.
let's think the humanists and the scientists, or the reductionist scientists, because not all scientists are reductionists, and
Hmm.
the poets. They often can't talk together, and the poets need to be sympathetic to the scientists as much as the scientists need to be sympathetic to the poets, so that in 1,000 years, if there are any humans left, those people with different proclivities understand each other. That's
Hmm.
all. That's the
Yeah.
argument. And I
Hmm.
occupy a kind of funny place where I do understand both sides.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
That's
I
it.
think like that's kind of like, what I might call like the shamanic personality is somebody that can walk in both worlds and be able to bring things back and forth from each world. And so you could think of the shamanic personality as someone who's bridging the worlds of science and mysticism, or, whatever, psychology and philosophy, like Hillman, tap dancing in both worlds. And
And it can be so creative. Coming back to the Coach Hillman thing,
Mhm.
they don't match. They don't match. But the fact that they don't match is why it's so damned interesting. So that would
Yeah.
be you and any other human being. And you think, oh, well, we don't match. And then some third thing is born,
Yeah. Well,
and that
that's Jung's whole idea about what could be possible in psychoanalysis when two people come together, and he'd always, who was it? The Mary, principessa or something like that, some old alchemist, you know.
Okay. Yeah,
And she
yeah.
had a thing about like the one creates the two and the two creates the three, and you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But it's
yeah,
like that idea
yeah,
that
yeah.
when
I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah, that's right.
two different
Sure.
things come together, there's a third thing created, and that's what he said
Yeah,
you should also always be looking for in the
yeah.
analysis.
Oh, that's brilliant. I should, yeah,
And that way, it's
that's
not my
great.
insight, it's not your great insight, but this third thing, and it's right.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
nice, right?
Yeah, I've got to bring that in to the story that yeah, a little anecdote that I use all the time,
Hmm.
because it is alchemical in that way, and it's been a long time since I've read Jung or even Hillman on alchemy, and life gets short.
I know there's just so much. Hey, look, talking about your experience and like that infinite apocalypses and annihilation, all that stuff. I think, you know, me and my friend Eric Davis are starting a new cult, and this is our principal deity. This is our principal deity for the cult. It's for people listening. It's Grover shrugging his shoulders, saying, "I don't know," and he's standing next to the number zero. So it's like our cult. The sales pitch is like how to become a know nothing, or
That's
we're
really
working on
good.
it. But
I like that
you,
a lot.
he
Yeah.
had one of these, and I fell in love with it. I was totally like caught by it, and so I found one on eBay, and I ordered it from the States.
Okay, all right, yeah.
So you should find one
That's
too, man. Bring it
I will
down.
try. I will
Put
try to find one. Yeah,
put it on
yeah.
your altar.
Okay,
Join the
yeah.
club.
That's really good. Yeah. Oh, and we bringing up Eric Davis. I don't even. I'm a big fan of Eric Davis, and I just discovered his stuff about 2.5 years ago now,
Oh
and
yeah, he's
he's
awesome.
yeah. Yeah, that was part of, and we don't have time because I'm going to have to go and you're going to have to go.
Yeah.
But the rest of the backstory of the first trip I made to Brazil was that Marco invited me, and I said yes, and it was as it turns out totally unprepared. But part of the reading I did, I was listening to Ezra Klein's podcast, which I always do, and he mentioned Eric Davis's book, High Weirdness, which
Mhm.
I'd never heard of, and I think he must have interviewed Davis, or if he, I think he did.
Yeah, he was on there.
Anyway, so I grabbed the book and I just read right through it. And I don't do that very often anymore. I just zoomed through that book and I thought, this is amazing. And I looked at the back cover, and lo and behold, Eric Davis had been a student of Jeffrey Kripal, who I'd just met like the year before at a Henri Corbin conference
Mm.
at Harvard. And I hadn't been able, because if you don't know Kripal's work, he's a professor of comparative religion at Rice University with many, many, many books. And he began as a scholar of Hinduism under Wendy Doniger, and he's got all the chops, all the credentials, all the languages. And at a certain point, I think in the 80s, he ran into Whitley Strieber's book, Communion,
Mm.
about, UFO abduction stuff. And he read it, and he thought, well, this is religious studies, man. I'm a
Mhm.
student of extreme experiences, and here's an extreme experience. So Kripal has been known ever since as a proponent of being open-minded about all sorts of high strangeness events. And I had met him because he gave a talk on the imagination and
Mhm.
UFOs at Harvard. And in retrospect, I thought to myself, I didn't hear a word he said because he was talking about fucking UFOs. And
Mm.
we don't do that, you know? But after being introduced to the territory by Davis, I grabbed one of Kripal's books and I read, I think, 7 of them
Mm.
before I had my first Iboga experience.
All
So
right, you're on a cripple jag.
all of those things came together to totally destroy my world. And it's been very interesting ever since.
It goes great. When I counsel people who are like ask me about really getting into yoga or psychedelics, I say, well, I always, give them the warning. I say, well, look, yoga and psychedelics can ruin your life, but every life needs a good ruining now and again. So it's up to you,
Yep.
but be
Yep.
prepared.
I mean, it's been a long story for me. This is like, well, 30 or 70 years, however you want to look at it, trying to loosen up.
That's awesome. That's not a
You
bad
know,
project. Just like loosen up,
it's a
man.
good project. Yeah, no, so by the time
If you're
I
going to
get
be
out of
shooting for
here,
something,
I got the Grover guy. You know, the little, yeah, I'm having
join
the
the
number
Zero
thing.
Club.
Yeah, the Zero Club for sure. It's very
Hey, man,
exciting. It's a
it's
wonderful way to live.
I knew it'd be fun to riff with
Yeah,
you and jam with you on these ideas, and it's been really super fun. Let's do it
it's
again sometime.
I would be delighted to do it again. It was really
Cool.
fun.
Next time you get
This
back
is
from Brazil, we'll
Yeah, yeah. Well, I
check
mean, this
in.
is I mean, honestly, I think this is important stuff to do, you know,
I think so
because
too, man.
in my little world, when I introduced Hillman in particular, because I wasn't totally insane years ago, but whenever I introduced people to Hillman, the young students, you know, in their 20s, um, they were just blown away. They
Yeah.
loved it. We
Well,
did
it's
it. We
like
did it. Yeah,
yeah, with all like the kind of like the postmodern thinking, like it's like, okay, great. They're like helping you deconstruct kind of
oh,
received wisdom and all that shit. But then Hillman comes along and gives it some soul, which I love,
it gives it some content.
and creativity and an artistic sensibility. And it's like, yeah, so we're not just kind of looking to annihilate and destruct everything, but we're
Yeah,
looking to build and be
yeah.
creative and keep
No,
reforming.
yeah, we
So I
didn't, you
think
know,
Hillman's
there's so
like,
much to
okay,
be said
get your
about it.
Foucault and all that, but then like, come on, Hillman, let him
Yeah,
like,
yeah. No,
yeah.
that's totally right. It's deconstruction with beauty and grace and love
Well,
and
look,
humor.
it's like Kali, deconstruction in service of creativity and
Yeah.
regeneration.
Yeah, she
Here
came
we go.
all by herself this first time, so maybe she'll have a partner next time. Won't be quite so apocalyptic. We'll see. I will definitely let you know.
All right, man. Take it easy. It's
Thank
been
you.
great.
Okay,
Cheers.
bye.
Talk soon. Bye.